Could we be seeing the beginning of the end of Roman Abramovich's dynasty at Chelsea? He bought the club in 2003. Chelsea have won 21 trophies during that time, 5 Premier Leagues, 5 FA Cups, 3 League Cups, 2 Champions League, 2 Europa Leagues, 2 Community Shields, and 1 Club World Cup and a Super Cup as well. But reports yesterday from Labour MP Chris Bryan, who has suggested that Roman Abramovich is selling up a lot of his assets, not just Chelsea, but also some of his homes in London, suggest that there is a possibility that Swiss billionaire Hans-Jörg Weiss, who's 86 years of age, by the way, and has a fortune of around about £3.8 billion, was offered the club yesterday. Well, look, let's be completely honest about it. First of all, the idea that this guy's going to buy Chelsea seems to be a bit of a non-starter, Crookie, because he would have to be part of a consortium. But it does appear that they are open to offers. Is that how we read it?
I think so. I think what's interesting here is that when Roman Abramovich released his statement on Saturday night, the briefing coming out of Chelsea was that nothing really changed. The club wasn't for sale. He wasn't calling in the huge debt that he has with the football club. I think it's 1.5 billion, isn't it, in loans that Chelsea owe Abramovich. So this would be a big money transaction were it to go through. And I'm not convinced that at the moment they're going to be queuing up to buy Chelsea because of that debt to the current owner, because of the uncertainty over a move to a new stadium in the long term. I think it's pretty common knowledge now that Chelsea do need to expand in terms of capacity to really catch up with the big clubs, not just in the Premier League, but in Europe as well. So unless Roman Abramovich is going to dramatically reduce his asking price, I think he could be stuck with the club for a while longer. But what is interesting is that Chelsea haven't come out and denied these reports that the club is up for sale. In the past, whenever it's been mentioned that maybe he's looking to cash in, they have come out and said that he's still committed and the club isn't for sale. That isn't happening at this moment in time.
And what would be worrying for Chelsea supporters, I wonder whether or not you think they should be concerned about the fact that he does owe them as much as £2 billion, or they owe him as much as £2 billion, because obviously a lot of the loans that he has given to the club had been turned into equity. But it was a quote yesterday from the Swiss billionaire when he said, Chelsea owe him £2 billion and Chelsea have no money, he suggested. So it does suggest that there is quite a lot of due diligence going on in terms of people looking at the books and trying to work out just how much the club is worth. Worth factoring in as well, you mentioned the stadium. Chelsea don't actually have the right to move the club anywhere else, because back in the 80s and early 90s, an organisation called the Chelsea Pitch Owners Association actually bought the pitch. Now, the stadium is owned by the football club and therefore Roman Abramovich, but the pitch itself, the freehold to the pitch where Chelsea have to play, is owned by the Chelsea Pitch Owners Association. And that was done to ensure that the club couldn't be turfed out of SW6.
So there's all kinds of forces at play here. I think what it does highlight before Trevor comes in is how fragile the ownership structure of football clubs in this country is. And we saw it, Sam, when we were covering Portsmouth down on the south coast. They had an owner by the name of Sasha Gajdemak who put a lot of money into the football club. They had half the England team playing for them when they won the FA Cup back in 2008. Incidentally, the last time that Tottenham won a trophy as well. We were talking about them at the top of the programme. But his assets were frozen, and Portsmouth ended up going into administration, I think 3 times in the end. They went all the way down to League Two. They were very close to going out of business. They were rescued by a group of supporters. They're trying to make their way up the league. So I think the Premier League do have to look into how they allow people to come in and buy football clubs, because it's a very dangerous situation that some of the biggest clubs in this country are at the whim of one person. If they walk away, then it quickly folds, and quickly we could see more clubs in trouble.
And Trevor, and this is, I suppose, the nub of the situation. The fact is that 3 weeks ago, the idea that a football club as big as Chelsea could be in a situation where its very future, was in debate. And many people will respond to this, I know they will, and say that that's not the case. It won't happen like that. But over the last 2 weeks, we've seen things happen that we never thought could happen. Even as a Manchester City supporter, the ownership structure there is very much unilateral. It's all to do with those from Abu Dhabi. If they decided to pull their investment, then again, they may well have set the club up in a brilliant way. They've got all of the infrastructure. But trying to run that on a regular basis with the income that actually comes through the door through non-Abu Dhabi means, they would find it difficult too, would their owner walk away?
I think a lot of clubs would, who are in this ownership model. But just going back to Roman Abramovich, was it not right that he tried to pass the club or the ownership of the club over to the charity arm of the football club?
That was a statement that was made on Saturday, and the trustees have actually insisted on an impenetrable indemnity policy before agreeing to that, and the Charity Commission are looking into the legalities of it as well.
So this seems to be plan B. So this seems to be plan B of that kind of initial plan to move the club over, just because obviously he doesn't want his assets to be frozen and the football club to be affected by that. So it's very murky what's going on, and now the fact that they look like they're trying to sell the football club, if I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be really concerned. And
Crook, you had a quote actually from Liz Truss, didn't you, about the fact that sanctions, actually the prelude to sanctions has already been extended to some of those oligarchs that are in London.
Yeah, but also it backed up what we were saying yesterday and what I was told at the EFL Cup final at the weekend, that a lot of rich Russians in this country have already called upon the services of some quite high-profile lawyers to try and make sure their assets aren't frozen. So, I mean, there's so many strands to this story, but I think we can take it right back to that statement on Saturday night announcing the club was being handed over to the trustees of that charitable foundation, seemingly without them actually having any say on the matter. It looks really clumsy now, that statement that was released on Saturday.
Yeah, well, when you think about it carefully, the idea that Emma Hayes, who is the women's manager at Chelsea and has been so for the last 10 years, could be, if that ends up being carried out, she's one of the trustees of that Chelsea Foundation, be part of the day-to-day running of the football club. And I don't know if she had any knowledge of it prior to it actually happening or what, but it's a completely different role for her to all of a sudden undertake. Bruce Buck is also on that panel as well. And then there's Sir Hugh Robertson, who was the chairman of the British Olympic Committee. Would he want to take that on? I think Seb Coe was also on that board at one stage as well. So there's an eclectic mix of people that actually are on that Chelsea Foundation board. And if they are to take the day-to-day running of the club away from Roman Abramovich, then I think they'll probably be questioning whether or not it's good for them to be doing it in the circumstances as well. Because what they won't want to be seen doing is stepping into the breach for Abramovich whilst he waits to either sell the club or to come back and take ownership in the future once everything, if it does indeed, has calmed down in Eastern Europe.
I think what we can also say is that it's unlikely that Chelsea fans will be able to find an owner with pockets as deep as the current incumbent, the man who's brought them so much success, as you say, over the last 2 decades. So I think if a sale does go through, I think it will change the landscape at Stamford Bridge quite dramatically, and Chelsea might find it difficult to compete with the likes of Trevor's beloved Manchester City in the immediate future.
Is it changing the landscape in the Premier League as a whole as well? You know, bearing in mind that now, as a result of this and other things that had happened in terms of ownership over the last couple of years, that actually, with the Tracy Crouch's independent review, we'll be looking a lot harder about who invests in football club. And will we be in a situation where actually our model, which is very much driven by foreign cash coming into these clubs and pumping it full of money and establishing them as world forces, actually the whole model has to change in order to make it a lot more self-sustainable, because otherwise you find yourself in this situation. Could this be a watershed moment for English football?
I think it should be. It should be the catalyst for me. You know, the longevity of football in this country, the sustainability of football in this country, not just the elite levels. We're talking about the Premier League, but I'm talking about all down the football pyramid. We've seen it during the pandemic. You know, a lot of the lower division clubs couldn't afford the test, couldn't play football. And for a lot of not elite footballers, over the last 2 years, it's been absolutely a nightmare. So I think we need to look at the broader landscape of football and how the funds are contributed. But we need to safeguard the sport because we all love it and we want to safeguard its future.
It could be good for the future of the Premier League, Sam, in terms of the competitive nature of it, because at the moment it is a bit of a closed shop in terms of that top four. We're all getting very worked up by the fact that maybe West Ham could have a say this season. Wolverhampton Wanderers were being mentioned by some, okay, by me, as possible Champions League contenders. But come the end of the season, I think it will be the usual suspects filling those top four positions.